Hello everyone and welcome to Negotiations for Human Resource Management, HRM 4490. This is your first video lecture for week 1. This is Introduction to Negotiation. This week we have negotiated the buying a house negotiation, and the expectation is that you'll watch this video and read chapters 1 and 2 of your textbook. So let's work through some of the ideas that are in your text and that we went over briefly in class as part of our debrief discussion. Starting with the idea, just the basic idea of what is a negotiation. So in this class, we're defining a negotiation as a decision-making situation in which two or more interdependent parties attempt to reach an agreement. In other words, it's a dialogue between two parties in which there's an attempt to either resolve a conflict, divide resources, or to develop a resolution for a set of issues that have been brought to the table. The idea with the type of negotiation that we will be dealing with in class is that at the end of the negotiation, the people at the table are better off than they were before they came to the table. If they're not better off, then the idea is that a no-deal situation should have resulted. So we are looking at the type of negotiations that lead to two parties resolving an issue, dividing resources, coming to an agreement, and being better off at the end of the discussion. That is the basic foundation of the negotiations and how the approach that we will use within this class. In our first negotiation in class, buying a house, you took part in what we call a distributive negotiation. In this type of negotiation, there are winners and losers. Meaning that there are people who receive the resources, and in order to receive those resources, they have to take the resource from the other dyad, the other member of the dyad. It's a zero-sum game, in other words. It's, as I probably likely said in class, it's a game of tug of war. One person takes something in order for the other person to receive it. You're dividing up scarce resources, and often there's only one issue on the table. This is a distributive negotiation. Distributive negotiations are relatively rare in the world, but they do, of course, happen from time to time. The far more common circumstance is the circumstance that we will look at as we move through the course, and that is an integrative negotiation. In this type of negotiation, there are often multiple issues on the table. There's an opportunity for mutual gain, and there's an opportunity for both parties to win and to achieve their interests or get what they are hoping to receive as part of the negotiation. So two very distinct circumstances, and both types of negotiations require different types of skills. So in our first class, we address some of the skills required for distributive negotiations. And as we move forward in the course, we will explore in greater detail this idea of integrative negotiations. In distributive negotiations, here are some of the features that we discussed as being critical to distributive negotiations. There's a real need to understand a few of the critical aspects of what defines the negotiation. In a distributive negotiation, this is defined largely by the bargaining range. Bargaining range exists in integrative negotiations as well, but they're far more complex because we're often dealing with multiple issues and a lot is going on at any one time, so the bargaining range is not as clear. In a distributive negotiation, the bargaining range is made up of bounded by reservation prices of either parties and determines whether or not there's a potential to make a deal as part of the negotiation. So the features of the bargaining range: there's a target point. This is the point at which the negotiator would like to conclude the negotiation. Each party that's at the table has a target point. Each party within the negotiation also has a resistance point. This is the point where the negotiator is indifferent to a deal, also known as the reservation point. Within the negotiation, as we learned in class, the opening offer, the first offer on the table, is also a critical number in the bargaining range. So let's take a look at this visually. Let's see what this looks like in chart format. The bargaining range, what we're hoping to achieve is to find the zone of possible or potential agreement, the ZOPA, within the negotiation range. If a seller's reservation price is less than the buyer's reservation price, then we have a positive ZOPA. There's an overlap, there's a space wherein a deal can be made. If that overlap does not exist, then we have a negative zone of potential agreement or zone of possible agreement, and there is no possibility of reaching a goal, or reaching a resolution within that negotiation. In other words, in situations where there is no zone of potential agreement, no positive ZOPA, the ZOPA is negative, the best deal for both parties is no deal. So let's go back to this idea of first offers being important within a negotiation. Why are first offers important? As we noted in the negotiation, first offers act as anchors, meaning that the first offer on the table often has more to do with the final result than any other value that's put down during the negotiation. So the question arises, when should you make the first offer? If you know that there's this powerful anchor that's possible, somebody puts down a figure and that the end result is likely to be close to that figure, then it's a fairly powerful move to put down the number, because you know that you're setting a flag or having some influence on what the final result will be. But the issue here is that sometimes you don't know what the bargaining range is. You don't have enough information to understand where the possible deal can be had. So the question then is, when do you make the first offer? Now, you are in the best position to make the first offer when you know, when you have a really good idea of your counterpart's reservation price, when you have a very clear idea of the bargaining range. In this circumstance, you are able to put down a first offer that could be in what we call the sweet spot. That's the area right outside the zone of potential agreement that allows you to bargain right back into the zone of potential agreement. You don't want to put down an anchor that is so far removed from the bargaining range that it offends people or causes somebody to walk away. If you feel that your counterpart has put down a strong anchor, something that is far outside the bargaining range, or something that is outside of the bargaining range and not in your favor, you have to attempt to deal with that anchor. And so there are some possibilities. One is to re-anchor, to put an anchor at a similar distance outside of the bargaining range in your favor, or to ask that person for another value before you start negotiations. In other words, to shake them of their anchor and to ask them for a second value, a second number that you feel would be more reasonably representative of the bargaining range. First offers, critically important in distributive negotiations because they set our understanding of where the negotiation will end up. Another critical idea within any negotiation, not just distributive, is the BATNA. This is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Your BATNA is your source of power. The better your BATNA, the more power you have within the negotiation. If you have alternatives, if you have things outside of the negotiation that will allow you to walk away from the negotiation, under these circumstances, you'll be able to understand at what point you are indifferent to a deal. You'll have a better threshold for considering alternatives to the deal that's in front of you, and it'll give you a little bit of leverage. So before you go into any negotiation, it's in your best interest to develop your BATNA. And this can be done by turning the most promising alternatives you have into real alternatives, or simply just by understanding what the alternatives are before you enter a negotiation, sitting down and listing your options, exploring your options, understanding your options, and making sure that you understand what your best alternative is, and that it's an alternative that you can live with and that you're willing to take. Under these conditions, you have a better chance of negotiating successfully and understanding your walk-away point. Also in class, we observed that during the process of negotiations, each party will make concessions. This is an important part of the negotiating process because concessions act as signals. They tell us a great deal about our counterpart's position. And they also help to build the relationship and develop trust. So a concession is the act of giving something up. And when you give something up, quite likely your counterpart will give something up as well. And you can set up a pattern of concession making back and forth. We know that when people are very far from their reservation point, they make very large concessions. And as they get closer to the reservation point, they start to make smaller and smaller concessions. So the patterns of concessions send clear signals. Concessions can also be used, as I noted, to build trust and build the relationship. If I'm hoping to create a better relationship with my counterpart, if I'm hoping to develop our partnership, I might make a concession or give something to them that I know they value. In class, when we talked about concessions, we also noted that there's some dilemmas with concession making and with this idea of giving information and sharing information and giving things up. There are a few dilemmas that negotiators deal with. The first is the dilemma of honesty. We know that within a negotiation, it's to our benefit to be honest about our needs, to tell people what we're hoping to achieve, and to be very straightforward about the resources that we have available. However, there is this tendency to feel that we need to keep some of our information tight to our vest, and that is actually accurate. We do. So there is this balance that needs to be struck between being honest, but also not giving everything away, not giving it all up. You would never want to, as an example, you would never want to reveal your reservation price, because then the negotiation's over. The other party will simply accept the reservation price as the deal. The other dilemma is the dilemma of trust. We will talk throughout the term of negotiations as an opportunity to build a relationship, to improve your interactions with somebody, to set up patterns of information sharing, as opportunities to build better business relationships and patterns of giving and taking. But the dilemma in that is, I want to be able to trust the person across the table from me, but I also can't be too naive and believe that every single thing that is being said is factual without having some sort of evidence for what's being presented. So there are some dilemmas within a negotiation, because it is this activity that is partly collaborative, but partly competitive. And when I say the word competitive, there is also a tendency within negotiations to be over-competitive. And we know when we are in a competitive mindset, we narrow our focus, we become very tunnel visioned. And that act of being so overly focused and having tunnel vision can actually narrow the possibilities and make it difficult to come up with a deal within a negotiation. So this is a concept that we'll explore throughout the term, this idea of concessions and concession making, and this idea of relationship and all of the complexities that come with it. We will also deal with the issue of bargaining tactics. Oh, goodness. Pardon me. We'll also deal with the issue of bargaining tactics. And tactics are risky moves within a negotiation. You'll note that the use of a tactic can be something that your counterpart reacts badly to. So in your textbook, there are a number of tactics that are outlined that are common within negotiations that we see quite regularly. Good cop, bad cop. So one interviewer who is the giver, one interviewer who is unfair and viewed as unfair, so that the other interviewer can be seen as doing favors. There's also low ball, high ball, where the value that's attributed to something can be either, depending on the side you're on, can be either too high or too low, and you start from these extreme positions. There's also the bogey, and this is where you give something up that is not important to you, but pretend that it is important to you. Giving somebody something in kind of a false way and saying, "Oh, this is really hard for me to give, but I'm willing to do it for you so that we can come to a deal." That's a bogey. There's also the nibble. The nibble happens typically when we are close to making a deal and everybody's feeling pretty good about the settlement options. And then the negotiator will ask for something that has never been on the table. Your textbook gives a retail example where somebody's about to buy a suit and might offer to the salesperson, well, I'll close this deal if you throw in a tie. So that's a really good example of a nibble. The idea that in the end, you try to take a little something more, despite the fact that the deal is almost done. So really what you're doing is taking advantage of the good feelings that you have because you've worked through the deal making already and you're almost done. There's also intimidation. There are many ways to intimidate. Anger, legitimacy, making somebody feel guilty. So there are lots of ways to intimidate the person across the table from you. And this is a tactic. You might do this, you might find that people do this in order to achieve their outcomes in their favor. But it's a fairly tactical, aggressive behavior. And then there's just straight out aggression, of course. There's also something called the snow job. This is the activity of providing your counterpart, excuse me, providing your counterpart with a great deal of information. In this situation, you would give them a lot of detail about something within the negotiation, hoping that all of that detail will confuse them, make it difficult for them, make it so that they're not able to logically follow the information and think that you know more than they do. Make it so they're bogged down in the information. That's a snow job. Now, all of these are bargaining tactics, as I've noted. And a bargaining tactic is, as I said before, it's a risky move. And they often lead to negative feelings, damaged relationships, and heavy consequences. So you might see some of this throughout the course. You'll certainly see some of this as you negotiate in life. There are things to watch out for, and there are also things to learn to deal with. So we'll have to figure out how do we deal with negotiators when they're using tactical moves. So what are our key learnings from this first week of class? Some of the key learnings, one that we haven't addressed yet, is this idea of preparation. Prepare. We talked about buying a house and how knowing more about the market, the real estate market, knowing more about housing prices, having a little bit more information about real estate in general would have helped many of you. So before you go into a negotiation, at a very minimum, you need to know your interests, what it is you want, your reservation point, your current BATNA, and any BATNA that you might be able to develop. You might also want to try and understand what these things are from your counterpart's perspective. Understand what they hope to achieve. Try to the best that you're able to determine what they're hoping to achieve. What are the things that might threaten their position, that might make it difficult for them to achieve it, and help communicate how you communicate your interests and understand the interests of your partner. These are all preparation issues that you'll want to deal with as you look forward to additional negotiations. Summary of the learning points for today: plan your negotiations, know your reservation price, anticipate your opponent's reservation price. Develop your BATNA, so develop your power within a negotiation. Remember that first offers act as anchors, but if you don't hit the right mark, if you don't hit the sweet spot, first offers can act as insults. So be certain that you have good information if you are going to use the strategy of trying to set an anchor. Remembering the power of concessions, and that concessions beget concessions. Concessions build relationships. Concessions build trust. And we can receive signals about the other party's negotiating position if we understand what the pattern of concession making means. We also need to remember that information is power. The more information we have about the situation, the circumstances, the case, or other parties' preferences, the more we're able to do within our own negotiation. And finally, hardball tactics are common, but there are problems associated with them. So that's something to keep in mind. As we move through the semester, you'll have some experiences with this, and hopefully we'll be able to do some live learning in the classroom. All right, so that is your first video lecture. For next week, we'll start to look at multiple issues. As I've noted, we'll move on to integrative negotiations. You should be reading chapters 1 and 2 following this video. And please remember that the role for next week will be assigned in class because of the way in which enrollments can fluctuate within the first few weeks of class. So as you arrive in class in the next week, you will be given a role, and we will move on. Please don't feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or concerns. Otherwise, I will see you in class next week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.